record the jingle, Jason.
Oh,
I
not
think
me.
you got it down.
Not me. Give me some auto tune and we'll talk. Give me some auto tune and we'll talk.
All right. Well, we are live, so this is awesome. Hello, everyone. I am Kat Udero, psychic empath and psychic wrangler. Before we see who I've wrangled in today's show, allow me to welcome you to Third Eye Salon, where in each and every show, we take a fresh and deep look between the veils of reality. Today is no different. We are going to be diving into the mysteries of the Anunnaki race and those that were abandoned on Earth for loving humans just a little bit too much. And so before we get into that, though, I want you to say hello to our my bestie, Lynda Colter-Bergh, psychic conscious business coach, heart as big as the world. Hello, Lynda. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. I'm so happy again to spend my day, my morning with everybody here. I love you guys so much. So everybody that's in this group, everybody that watches us, and that extends beyond. So thank you for joining us. I am your live stream chat host. As always, my policy is play nice or get out. I don't have tolerance for intolerance, period. Please make sure that if you're enjoying this, which I hope you are, that you like, share, and hit that subscribe button and hit it again and make it black, and then you'll be notified when we go live. And check out their podcasts on Apple and Spotify. If you can give us a like there, it helps there as well. If you've been, let's coffee, hang on. Now I'm ready. If you enjoy our shows, I do encourage you to donate. Kat puts so much time in this, and the links are below. If you can't, that's fine too. You can do just as much by sharing our podcast and getting our group out. And the same goes for our Facebook group, Third Eye Salon. Share that with your friends, and let's expand our community and our joy, our appreciation for each other, and our support for each other. Okay. So with that, hello, Jack. I am so interested in everything that you have to share with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, first of all. And I think I can improve my audio here for you guys. I'm going to do that. But I truly appreciate the opportunity to come on. And you guys seem like an amazing group of people.
You're just in an echo. That's okay.
There you go.
You're in a tunnel in time.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think you were fine before. It wasn't bad before.
All right.
To me, at least.
Should be better now.
Yeah, you seem louder.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to you lovely people. So just want to wish everybody out there peace, knowledge, and love. And going forward, that's really what humanity needs. So.
Thank you, Jack. We are super excited. There's so much to get into, but before we do that, I also want to make sure we say hello to Mr. Jason Adkins, being so graceful, stepping in for Miss Angela today. He is a artist that channels our galactic family. He's a psychic medium, and he just is a great guy all around. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing well. I'm always a pleasure to be here. And I feel like this camera angle is working for him. It feels like I'm like, yeah, he works out. I don't. But the camera, I'm loving it. Glad to be here.
You already got a compliment on your artwork in the back there. Nancy loved your piece. You want to speak to what that is?
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
It's old. It's a pour. So
okay.
Mix some water, some paint, some glue, stir it up, drop a silicone, get a blowtorch.
Wow.
I haven't hung everything back up that I took to
your art show.
The show, yeah.
Okay. Nice. Well, you've already got kudos on that. So all right, I'm going to hop into Jack's bio so we can get this party started. Jack Cary is an investigative author with over 30 years as a field investigator into paranormal phenomenon, cryptozoology, and ancient unsolved mysteries. He has appeared on numerous docuseries discussing these subjects. He's an author of the American Sorcererer, Bigfoot Unleashed, Paranormal Planet, and the Enoch Code, which is his most recent book. Jack is also a regular contributor on Gaia TV for the Ancient Civilization series, which is where I met this wonderful man. So give us a thumbs up if you are excited to learn not just about the Anunnaki, but the science that they left behind, which we still have access to today. So speaking of which, Jack, I kind of want to just dive in and talk about the Anunnaki, because for a long time I was like, Anunnaki, whatever. Like I just didn't care, because I was more involved in like the current extraterrestrial goings on, you know what I mean? And I didn't understand the importance of the history. So I was wondering if, you know, from your understanding, if you could give us a breakdown of who the Anunnaki are and why it's important to learn about them.
Sure. So in the oldest writings that we have for the human species, the Anunnaki are described. And those writings are the ancient Sumerian tablets. Most people don't realize that we discovered 500,000 cuneiform stone tablets at the palace of Ashurbanipal. And these 500,000 tablets, perfectly preserved, describe every tiny little detail and facet of Sumerian life. And central to this is their teachings of the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki literally means those who came from the sky. It is this very same thing as the Nephilim described in the book of Genesis, meaning those who were cast down. The very same as, you know, a wide array of oral histories describing these beings. This is the very earliest account that we know of. And in this account, they describe either 12,000-year-old science fiction that they just invented, or they were simply trying to convey to future generations a profound truth that they knew to be a reality. And that was that these beings were directly responsible for the generation of the human species. That they literally came to this planet, they found a hominid species. That hominid species was then artificially inseminated. It says in the both in the book of Enoch and in the Sumerian tablets that this was basically done with the seed of one of the two Anunnaki princes that was here. His wife was the genetic scientist, and her name was Nin-Kar-Sog. The prince, his name was Enki, and his brother's name was Enlil. This is known to people who are familiar with the Anunnaki. So this leads to the very creation of what they call the very first Adamu, and that's where the word Adam comes from. And this is where the very first human comes into being. Now, back then, they did not create humans with the ability to procreate. They were literally making batches of them at a time, and they were serving as workers down in the gold mines because the Anunnaki workers, not used to this atmosphere, found the work to be too difficult. They needed the gold to help repair their atmosphere from a war that they were engaged in with a civilization that was flourishing on Mars at the time. And the Anunnaki, if people out there are unfamiliar, were on a planet known as Nibiru. This was known as the 9th planet in our solar system. It was called the planet of the crossing.
Why the planet of the crossing?
Well, because it had an orbit that seemed to cross between us and Mars.
Okay.
And so that's what they ended up calling it, the planet of the crossing. I think Nibiru literally translates to mean planet of the crossing.
And this is just briefly, this is the same planet that's in the asteroid belt, like the asteroid belt that we have is that planet. Is that correct?
Right, I'll get to that point.
Okay, I'm sorry. Jumped ahead.
No, you're fine. So this war was raging. We're not exactly sure what the war was over. We assume it was natural resources of some kind. This war has been confirmed by the world's leading, best trained remote viewers who were given it as a blind target. They knew nothing about the target, and here they go describing a massive war between a planet that's no longer there and a civilization on Mars, matching all of this ancient knowledge that we have coming out of these ancient oral histories, right? So this war is raging. The atmosphere on Nibiru is suffering because of the war. We know that the atmosphere on Mars was completely wiped out. And we know that on Mars right now, there are vast deposits of an element known as xenon-129. Xenon-129 only forms during nuclear explosions. So we know for a fact that the war took place on the surface of Mars. Now, what the remote viewers at farsight.org are telling us is that right before the Martian civilization completely gives out, just gets wiped out, they're able to build and launch a super weapon described by the remote viewers as being a planet killer, right? It is the ultimate planet killing weapon, and they successfully launch it. That hits Nibiru and it destroys it completely. And that becomes our asteroid belt. Nibiru is now the asteroid belt. Mars had remnants left, and they built space arcs. And these survivors set sail for the only other habitable planet they knew about, which was Earth. And they landed in what today is modern day Antarctica. And there are military elements there now digging up those archaeological finds.
Now, are you saying that there are people coming from Nibiru or Mars or both?
Both.
Okay.
So right as the war ended, these Martian survivors set sail for the Earth. But there were already Anunnaki here mining. But it was the only planet they could get to. But the Anunnaki that were left here because of what I just described with the first Adamu. This becomes a major drama point within the whole Anunnaki higher upper echelon structure, if you will. So here's an Anunnaki prince who's directly responsible for creating the slave race to work in these mines, and he did it with royal DNA. Keep that in mind, because the royal structure is what we end up later duplicating here on the Earth. So keep that in mind. This is a true monarchy of a structure. A king whose name is Anu, which is where the word Anunnaki comes from. Two princes, Enki and Enlil. Enki is the second born and born to a consort of the king, and therefore is never eligible to ever be king. Enlil, his older brother, will always be, or is actually the younger brother. Enki was the firstborn, but Enlil was the one who was going to inherit the throne, right? But Enki is still treated as a royal son. He's the science officer, and his wife is the genetic scientist in modern parlance, you know. She is directly responsible for taking his DNA, inseminating this hominid, creating the human species who, up until a point, did not have the ability to procreate. At some point, they decide that it's going to be easier to do that rather than to keep building batches of them. So they let them procreate, and they're able to just produce. Pretty soon, that gets out of hand. And the High Council of the Anunnaki says, you know what? This is an abomination. We need to wipe this out. And we don't know if they caused the Great Flood or if they simply stood by and allowed it to happen as a cometary impact came in. But the Book of Enoch clearly describes 7 cometary impacts coming to hit the earth. And Enoch traces his lineage back to Enki. And who is his grandson? Noah. His great-grandson becomes Noah, and it's through the lineage of Noah, who survives the deluge, that the great secrets of the mystery schools and the Anunnaki survives. It's through his bloodline. And this bloodline actually extends out afterwards and becomes the ruling elite of all of the global families. They trace their lineage back to an Anunnaki prince, which is why they think they have such a right to rule on this planet. And yes, they're quite aware of that lineage and of their DNA, which is why they've always sought to interbreed with one another. These family lines have always interbred with one another. Now, in the Book of Enoch and in the Bible, it says 200 of them descended on Mount Armon after the flood. That was Enki and his followers getting cast down by Anu and the High Council because they plotted to keep some humans alive. There was a big to-do, right? Enki and his wife created this amazing species that was part Anunnaki, and they didn't want to see it destroyed. And they plot through the bloodline of Enoch to Noah, which in the Sumerian tablets, his real name is Utnapishtim or Gilgamesh, right? All of these
Noah is Gilgamesh?
Yes, all of these biblical stories are actually in the Sumerian tablets. You're just seeing the Semitic versions of them in the Bible. But these tales are all in the Sumerian tablets. So he survives. That's discovered by the High Council, and they know what happened. And Anu basically says, you love this invention, this species so much that you would defy my word. I will cast you down among them for the rest of your days, and you can just live among them. And that's what he did. And it happened right before Nibiru was completely destroyed. And these cast down Anunnaki, which was Enki and his wife and 200 of their followers, were the fallen angels described in the Bible and in the Book of Enoch, who end up interbreeding with the daughters of men whom they had created and over time had slowly genetically evolved to look so much like them that they found them to be beautiful.
Mm.
And because they shared the DNA, they could readily reproduce with them. So that's what ended up happening. Now these fallen Anunnaki left on the earth. Imagine that you were a castaway on a desert island. What, you have no technology, no tools, no medicine, nothing. What would you build? What could you build? Because that's the exact scenario left to the fallen Anunnaki. And what they did was went around and they built these megalithic structures with advanced scientific knowledge and mathematical skills and engineering skills with no tools in a way that we can't even duplicate today.
Lynda, hop in.
So my first question that popped in my head is, when you say that Noah was known by a different name, how, and I'm sure that's like multiple places, how do you cross-reference that? What method do you use to know that this person is this person?
Well, if you just study theological, any theologian knows that those stories ended up being from the Sumerian tablets, much older. See, the Hebrew culture and the Akkadian culture and the Syrian culture all came out of Samaria. And they each ended up having different versions of these same stories, and they're all identical. So the same story told in the Bible with Noah, that identical story is told, but with a different name in the Sumerian tablets. It's the same flood. Everything gets wiped out. This one man with his family survives. They ended up repopulating the earth. It's that same story.
Yeah, thank you, because it's reflected in so many different religions across the world. But a lot of people I know don't know that.
Yeah, even when missionaries made it to North America, they were amazed to discover that the story of Noah was known to them, except for in their stories, it was a man in a canoe with his family tied to a tree at the top of a mountain. See, that same truth, though, that spark of truth is there in all of those world mythologies.
And the Hopi, the ant people took them down during the flood.
Now,
underground.
I'll blow your mind. Now, I love that you brought them up, the Hopi, because in the Hopi language, the word Anu means ant, and the word Naki means friend. Anunnaki. Yep.
Did not know that.
Right. And
Phenomenal.
it was the Anunnaki who kept them alive, the fallen Anunnaki.
Wow.
See, those are the connections I love to hear in the language that pull it together.
Right. Yeah, it's all interconnected. And
So,
go ahead.
I do have a question about the Anunnaki, and you can address it now or later. I don't know how to pronounce this glacier. Do the Anunnaki have anything to do with the Thwaites? Twaites glacier?
I have not heard of that glacier either, so I'm not certain what they're do.
Okay. We'll have others, but I'll weave them in.
Sure.
All right, let's just kind of back up here for a minute. That was a huge download. That was like receiving a major download. So I'm wanting to look at this because did the Anunnaki that said, okay, Enki and his wife, so they had fallen in love with their creations, and so Enlil was like, okay, great, now you're going to be part of this, and bye-bye, we're done. So then was this from their planet, and then the planet is destroyed so that literally the only survivors are the ones that were cast down onto the planet?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. So after they're cast down, the war is still raging up there, and Mars is able to launch that weapon, and it destroys Nibiru completely. And we know all of that because of the blind targeting that was done by these multiple groups of remote viewers who are so talented that they were able to draw up details of this stuff. Not ever even, remote, when they're targeting something, it's a blind target. They literally know nothing about the target other than a random serial number completely randomly generated by the person who chooses the target, whom they never even meet. So, I mean, when you have that kind of blind controls and protocols in place, which were developed by the Stargate program, CIA Stargate program. I mean, they spent $200 million to ensure that what they were witnessing was in fact psychic functioning and not something that just appeared to them to be psychic functioning through cross-contamination. And they did that through developing these controls and protocols, which are today the blind targeting controls and protocols to keep these viewers completely blind to what it is they're targeting. Otherwise, you don't know if they're just imagining what they're seeing or not.
And I also know there was a project that was called Brilliant Pebbles, I believe, and it was a scientific thing where they took the meteorites that are in orbit and they traced them back through time, like it was a scientific mathematical thing, until they were like, just see the history of it until it reformed into a planet, and they were like able to say, oh, this is a planet, this was a planet that exploded.
I mean, yeah, I've not heard that before, but it matches with what the group is that I'm actively studying at the moment. So
hop in, Jason. You came off mute?
Yeah, and I'm sorry about the noise. This bird has been tapping at my window for the last 3 days. And I'm like,
is it a raven?
It's called like a brown, it's this little brown bird. And I'm just like, what? Who is this? Like, what do you want?
He said,
my
freaking
God.
feed me, man. Freaking feed me.
I mean, it's been like I woke up this morning hearing this tap, 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 and it's the bird on this one window. So frustrating. Okay, so I do have a question. Does the story of Atlantis and Lemuria tie into the two different races or the two different planets?
It does. I'm glad. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because I would have forgotten this particular detail, and it's extremely important. So the space arcs that were launched by the culture, these humanoid people that were on Mars, and this is another thing that I'll talk about later on, the fact that there were humanoid-like beings on various planets in our solar system is very strange. When you talk to a biologist or exobiologist, they're like, that just can't happen. But there's new science that says that it's actually probably the highest probability. Anyway, these space arcs, they ended up landing in what is today present day Antarctica. Back then, it was a beautiful, tropical, very hospitable environment, and it would have been a beautiful place to settle. And they ended up landing there, and apparently they rebuilt quite a civilization in Antarctica before what appears to have been some other planetary cataclysm that took place. And this planetary cataclysm shoved Antarctica into an area where it began to freeze over. And when it did, this caused a huge diaspora of those people around the globe. And those people are the same as the elongated skulls that they're finding in Paracas, Peru, and in other areas around the world, which do not have any signs of ritual head binding. On top of that, they only have 25% human DNA. That's all been proven. So if you look at the Paracas skulls, you'll see exactly what these people from Mars look like. And I believe, and the remote viewers also believe, that that is the origin of the Atlantean story. And it was these people who ended up landing all around the world who built the pyramids, the same pyramids that they were building, on Mars. It's interesting because the Anunnaki appear to have also been pyramid builders. So we don't know, there is a difference in the style of pyramids, but that's it. and that's fascinating to me. But that's how all of those pieces seem to fit together. Most people are like, oh, there's no evidence of pre-Atlantic contact before Columbus. And I remind them of a huge amount of evidence that comes in the form of what they call the cocaine mummies. And people like me call it the curse of the cocaine mummies. And there's actually a documentary called Curse of the Cocaine Mummies. And I mentioned this in a documentary I have on my YouTube channel about a lost city in the Grand Canyon. But a scientist interested in the toxicology of ancient Egyptians decided to do toxicology tests on all of the mummies and all of the different museums throughout Europe to see what kind of ancient plants they were ingesting. Wanted to see what they were up to. Every single one of them tested positive for both cocaine and tobacco, two plants that only grow in the Americas. Think about that. Only grow in the Americas, between two cultures that were both building pyramids. And all of a sudden, you have a very strong argument that there was transatlantic trade taking place, and that these amazing plants that the royalty liked to ingest were coming from across the ocean.
Now, why is it a curse? Well, maybe you can turn your volume down a wee bit because there's a bit of reverb, if you don't mind.
Sure. How's that? Is that better?
Well, yep. Okay, test. But yes, so thank you. What is the curse of the cocaine mummies?
The curse is that every single historian around the world is just cringing in their bed every night, going, "Oh my God, I hope nobody finds out that these things have cocaine and nicotine in their system, because we're going to have to rewrite all of human history." That's the curse. And you know how staunch academics are, professional academics. I mean, I remind people, these are people that are defending their careers that they just paid $120,000 for. They're not going to willingly admit that they're wrong about anything and give up the one income source that's going to help them pay back those student loans. You know, so.
And there's whoa, there was some reverb, and there's a concentrated effort to suppress it, and I think that is also part of the lineage that we're in. That we'll get to that, because I do want to I think that's important to tie that in, that it's not just about their money, but like it's the whole system is systemized to keep us believing a certain narrative that has just been clipped of so many truths. So go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to sort of agree with you there. In the documentary about the Lost City in the Grand Canyon, which may or may not be Anunnaki, it may in fact be the Lost City of Akhenaten. He may have disappeared with 60,000 of his followers to the place where all of the great plants are grown, and ended up building the city in the Grand Canyon. It kind of looks like that because of the artifacts described in the Phoenix Gazette in the late 1800s that were found there. But there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that the Smithsonian has over time covered up a huge amount of historical and archaeological evidence.
Imagine that.
Yeah. So it's amazing. But we have an entire list of all of the artifacts taken out of the site. And now the Smithsonian says that they never saw them, never had them, even though the men mentioned in the article from the Phoenix Gazette in 1893 were listed as being employees of the Smithsonian. Yeah, it's awful iffy. And now I tell you something fascinating. So the area where this city's supposed to be, it has an entrance that you go into, and it's hollowed out inside, like an entire cliffside, a vast city. A city could hold 100,000 people. That entire area, which is a vast area, is completely off limits, not only to the public, but to park personnel. And all of the peaks in that area all have Egyptian names. Now, here's where things really get weird. When you line up all of the peaks and everything, it matches exactly the constellation of Orion, the same as on the ground in Egypt.
Wow. You've still got a little bit of reverb. Wow, or a lot. Do you have like headphones that like I've got that you could put in so you could still hear, but what we're saying doesn't? Okay.
I don't have any, but oh, is that better?
Testy test. Hopefully. Yeah, so far so good. It's just that whenever someone comes off mute and says something, it's like, and then you can hear the words, but hopefully.
Yeah, I'm not hearing that at all.
Yeah, I think it's just on our side. But all right, so here's what I want to do. I kind of want to pull back a little bit. I feel like this should be an animated series of like this whole history. It could be a series that is broken down, and it would be so good. So I'm wondering, what is the story of Lemuria versus Atlantis? Because you hear so many different stories about Atlantis, where it was a global civilization. It wasn't in a specific location. It may have had like a capital, but it was global. But like before Atlantis, there was Lemuria, where people weren't such assholes. And Atlantis seems to have a lot of parallels to us today, where it's like genetic experimentation. We're going to do what we want to do. We love war. Like, and there's a lot of, ego in Atlantis, as there is in our current society. But Lemuria was said to be much more peaceful and connected to Gaia. Can you unpack that from your research and understanding?
Yeah, from my research and understanding, Atlantis came much later. than Lemuria. I think Lemuria was probably not humans the way we see humans. I think there was a species that was here before we were created. That is where the origin of the Lemurian kingdom comes from. And how advanced they were, I don't know. But there are signs everywhere, and dates keep being pushed back further and further that there were vast, advanced civilizations, plural, in Earth's ancient past. And I'm talking about maybe even predating dinosaurs. You know, you're talking about millions of years ago.
Okay. Let me go ahead.
I kind of have two questions.
Also, I was just going to briefly mention the Silurian hypothesis, which is the idea that there was a species of dinosaur that may have lived long enough and evolved long enough to be very much like us, and that it could walk upright, it had logical reasoning, it could manipulate matter, had opposable thumbs, that type of thing. And it's called the Silurian hypothesis. And believe it or not, there are actual biologists who think that it was quite possible that there were dinosaur-like hominid creatures at one point. And a lot of people in modern day UFO lore and alien abduction lore report reptilian aliens, you know, and that's something that the remote viewers talk about a lot. It's something that is something that fascinates me, because in a world where we keep pushing back the boundaries of what is believable and what we're discovering to be real, when you begin to talk about that particular subject, that's the here and no further point for most people. They just simply reject it out of hand that there could possibly be a reptilian alien somewhere interacting with the Earth. It's fascinating to me as a paranormal, you know, investigator for 30 years, just the psychology of it.
We're going to come back to that. Jason, hop in.
Well, that was actually going to be one of my questions. But my second question is, when they talk about the ones that were left behind and the daughters of man and their children, that's where the legend of giants comes from, right?
Right. That's exactly right. And, you know, and there again, you cross back into the biblical stories with the story of Goliath and the founder of the ancient Hebrew people is who? The one that slays the giant, the one that slays the last of the offspring of the Nephilim, right? Who he's described as being. Now they actually have found a pottery shard in the same area where Goliath is said to have lived in the Bible, and it has his name on it. But here's the fascinating thing is Goliath was the son of a giant named King Og of Bashan. And King Og and the kingdom of Bashan, which is one of the most crazy kind of mysterious places in the Bible, is this place where like black volcanic rock and stuff. That's what they described it as, Bashan. And they lived in this thing. And they described his bedstead, his, you know, bed frame, as being 12 cubits long. Well, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 feet. This guy was 18 feet tall. Can you imagine that? And when you're talking about a species who were so adept at manipulating genetic material, it's interesting that, to me, they ended up creating their offspring to be big enough to be the rulers of all the other people. We're on, you know, it ended up breeding this one group that were just giants. It says in the Sumerian tablets that Adam, who we call Adam, becomes over time the very first priest king of Eden. So over time, these Anunnaki, you know, offspring were given the kingships of all of the kingdoms as they developed across the world. And they became today what we call the Serpent Kings. It's this weird serpent symbolism that seems to accompany the Anunnaki.
Okay.
I know they're depicted in every bas relief as looking completely human.
You're saying so much, and I'm just running to try to keep up to get the questions that are like flying through my head. So I want to go back to let's go back to talk about giants for a minute, just because that's always something that's fascinated me, where you're saying that because my understanding or my perception was that giants were kind of a whoops, like, oh, we didn't need to make like these giant beings that were like, they were sort of an abomination in terms of, oh, no, they're big, they're aggressive, they like to eat humans. Whoopsie, this was not something we meant to create. But you're saying that they were intentional and they had the powers of manipulation. Speak more to that, if you would.
Yeah, I think that there's every indication that, you know, these weren't creatures that made mistakes like that.
Okay.
The Anunnaki are described as being master genetic manipulators and scientists, and the two that are left behind are the scientist and his wife. The genetic, scientist, Ninkarsag was her name, and she went by the nickname Ninti in Sumeria, which means wind, breath, or life. Isn't that fascinating? I find that profound. You know, Ninti later on is credited with both inventing cereal grains, because they spontaneously appear in human history, right? In the Sumerian tablets, she's the one who ends up inventing cereal grains and ends up domesticating or teaching humans how to domesticate canines. Over time, the lineage and the domestication of the canine becomes wrapped up together in what they call the mysteries of Cain and the lineage of Cain in occult groups. And Cain, if you'll recall, is never punished in the Bible. Never happens. Cain is actually assigned a black dog by God to guard him all of his days. And the reason why, or the being, the supposed reason why, is that God wants to punish Cain himself. He doesn't want any reprisals from other humans. But that's just inferred. And what does Cain do? He goes east of Eden and he founds the kingdom of Nod, right? And it's the very first civilization. It's the very first kingdom in human history. Well, when you look at the two genealogies for Cain in the Bible, they both go right back to Enoch. And Enoch goes right back to Enki. So you can see the survival of this through time, this ancient, oral history. And it's just sort of picks up symbolism through each of these cultures. But back to the giants, yeah, I think there's indication that their offspring, they gave, the ones they wanted to rule the others, they gave certain size to. It wasn't like they had weapons of any kind. It wasn't like they had laser guns or anything. The guys that needed to rule had to be the biggest and the baddest and the toughest warriors. And those were the guys who became the kings. Well, these kings were also priests, and the priest held all of this supposed forbidden knowledge from their fathers. This forbidden knowledge described in both the Bible and the Book of Enoch is the very beginnings of the ancient mystery schools. And they describe being taught astronomy and science and the division of roots, which is medicines, the embellishment of the face with makeup and jewelry. They taught them the art of warfare and how to fashion weapons. They taught them the arts of sorcery. And the one of the Anunnaki, who's the one who's supposed to have been the father of teaching them magic or sorcery, his name was Semyaza. And Semyaza was tasked with teaching them that Ninti and Enki designed within them this whole chakra endocrine system that allows for what we refer to as Kundalini energy or awakening, which allows for advanced human psychic functioning. That is the basic secret of all the mystery schools. It is the wellspring from which all occult knowledge comes from. And it's because we have a biology that we can use in the same way, this amazing way, that they basically hid within us as a secret weapon. This was them giving one last middle finger to Anu and the High Council, saying, you know what? Not only did we teach them all the forbidden secrets, but we also gave them the last Promethean key they'll ever need to achieve their own freedom. From you. They didn't know that Nibiru would be destroyed a little bit later at all. They were planning on us having to fight a battle against the Anunnaki, who would come back to destroy us one day. And now we're left with this hidden, beautiful knowledge that they left us, these fallen Anunnaki, that we're going to have to put back together into a science. And Arthur C. Clarke said, any science that is sufficiently advanced enough will be indistinguishable from magic. Right? That's what we're talking about, because it is a science. And not only did they build that within our bodies, but they hid the secrets of it in the mathematics of all the megalithic structures that they built around the globe, knowing that we would eventually discover that secret in those mathematics.
This is so much better than Ancient Aliens. Lynda, hop in.
Okay, so one of our questions, and I agree, I always hear the giants referred to as he and male. Are there records of any female giants?
Oh, Lord, yes. There had to be plenty of female giants. In fact, there was a surviving tribe of the female giants in the Amazon who were witnessed. They were witnessed by white missionaries going down the Amazon River. As late as that in history, they were still alive. And they were called the Amazonians for a reason. And this was a race of giant women, warrior women. Those were the giants.
That's the myth or legends of the Amazons. That's who that is.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you answered the question I was gonna ask. Because I was gonna say, like, realistically, if you have these giant men, because they are always referred to as women, like, where's the math at?
Right.
You know, like how does this
Exactly.
fit here? And then even, and I know that the human body can, to a certain degree, can do amazing things. But even with the childbirth aspect, if you're carrying a giant baby, how does that work out well for?
Well, you have to realize most of what we know about giants comes from Judeo tradition, and that's a very patriarchal tradition. And most of the writings say he. It doesn't say he and she, or just she. It always says he. And that's just because that's the way it was. But clearly, I think it's referring to an entire generation that they produced.
When you made the comment about magic is really just science, right? There's a quote in one of the Marvel movies where they're like, magic is just science we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
Right? Because the one guy just cannot believe that magic is something that exists. And they're like, oh, it's just something that you don't understand. It's science you don't understand.
Oh, I can assure you it does. And the techniques, which I can tell you were taught to me by masters, I have chronicled in American Sorcererer, my first book that I wrote, which also has this history in it, because I felt like it was crucial to shed all of the false symbolism that's been crusted on the practices over time by various religions, to show a true history that could be backed by real history and archaeological findings, and a lineage of that knowledge, and how we can use it today. And that's what my book is about, and how we can use it literally to secure our freedom from what I believe right now, is a hostile alien presence on this planet. I believe that's true.
All right, well, let's shift into that. I lowered my volume. Am I still loud enough for people to hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you, bless
Okay.
the audience. Let me know. Everybody, let me know. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear Kat okay.
Thank you, Miss Lynda.
I can hear you.
Now, I have a couple questions since you're bringing it into the now that have come up. And so I promised that I would try to get them in. One of them is if you know who is guiding the pyramid ships that we're seeing, the upside down ones, like that were at the Kremlin. If you have any idea who is running the ship.
I do not. And, the one that's hanging over the Pentagon is like, when I saw it, and it's upside down, and the sheer vastness of it, the size of it is just so enormous. I kept thinking to myself when I'm looking at that footage, still today, what a message. Because that is one clear message. You're gonna pop up right over the Pentagon with a structure as ominous, as overpowering as that is. And I'm thinking to myself, no wonder it's being kept a secret.
Talk about giants.
And maybe this species wants it to be kept a secret. Who knows? But
I look at it
I can
as
tell
calm the
you,
shit down.
I do know this. There is a very positive, I think, undeniable link with a lot of evidence to show that the black triangles, the ones that aren't ours, are actually controlled by the reptilian race. And it's those black triangles that were positively connected by NIDS, or the National Institute for Discovery Science, which was founded by Robert Bigelow, the man who basically controls all the black budget programs for the United States. He's the aerospace contractor, the famous Bob Bigelow. They proved with a big study that they could link sightings of the black triangles with cattle mutilation breakouts. I find that fascinating.
That is the first I have heard of that. Mr. Jack would like to grab himself a cuppa.
I will grab a cup of coffee real fast.
Grab a cup of coffee, and you do that. And I was just going to ask Jason while you're doing that. Have you had any psychic impressions popping in through your very psychic mind? Any images you've seen? Anything that's been coming up for you during this conversation?
Nothing. The energy when he started talking about, the Anunnaki, but as far as like a person, but like in regards to the upside down pyramid ship thing, like the very first feeling and thought I got is, well, and yes, I know they're big, and so that the size can intimidate people, but if you were going to be like, hey, this is us, we're friends, wouldn't you want to represent yourself in a shape that we're familiar with? Does that make sense? Like, we're familiar with this pyramid shape because they are all over the planet. They're not one continent specific, even though some of them may look differently. Like in my head, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I know this shape. Like, this should be something that's familiar to me, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, and I think also I think about like Stargate, the movie and the series, but the original movie Stargate, like they come down in a big pyramid, and it's kind of like, hey, like we're back. All the things that you see that are all over your planet, we're back.
Well, and there's a lot of talk about in certain shows that I've seen where they talk about specifically the Stargate shows, kind of being those little like dropping hints of truth, and like, oh,
Disclosure.
These Stargates and this, and this that show, and then is it called Jupiter's Jupiter something. And it's Mila
Jupiter's Legacy or Jupiter's
yeah, there's a comic book show, and then there's a movie with Mila Kunis and Magic Mike, the guy from Magic Mike.
Jupiter Rising.
Jupiter Rising. Like they have the elephant people that you hear certain people talk about, the reptilians, and some of them have wings. And they're the royalty, and they're farming humans for the youthfulness. That's how they stay young. Like all these different shows that they just are kind of dropping those hints in. So it would make sense that the Stargate would have the Egyptian kind of theme, right? And then we have these pyramid shapes, just kind of floating in the sky, all magic-like. But to the short answer to your question is no, like nothing specific, like or individualistic. Does that make sense? It's just like an overall
vibe.
Yeah, but it kind of just kind of sitting here.
What were you going to say, Miss Lynda?
So I found it interesting that I brought up the ant people from the Hopi when he was saying, Anunnaki. The other part was when he was talking about chakras, instantly my moon chakra started vibrating. So that's usually a huge confirmation for me. That's usually on the money that I get when I'm working with my clients or when I'm getting downloads. That's what I feel is that huge vibration. So I'm going to go back and listen again. But yes, to me, that having those in alignment, that's one of the things that I do is ground and bring them into alignment and then shoot that straight up to what I call source, and then bring that knowledge back down and create that funnel. But it is the alignment of those chakras and pulling that in that I think helps produce that effect. So yeah, I just found that really interesting.
I loved the part also. Thank you for talking about your moon chakra. I always love it when that happens with you and you're like, womp, womp, womp. And I'm curious also about like, hey, good, awesome. We'll shift into reptilians. I'm just going to kind of finish this thought, and you can tell me what you think on this, because there had to have been multiple species of giants then, because you got this 18-foot giant, but then we hear about the red-haired giants who the Native Americans were, having to defend themselves with and basically kill because they were eating them. So I'm wondering what the degradation or what the de-evolution or evolution, whatever it might be, of like these giants who were priest kings that had 18 feet long beds to the little, not little, but the lesser ones that were just problematic.
Yeah, well, we're not really sure how big the red-haired giants were, but I think what you're seeing is just, there were 200 Anunnaki bloodlines that came down on Mount Armon. So every one of them took a wife and bred a bloodline. And it's those 200 bloodlines that are the 200 ruling families on this planet. And they're all interbreeding with one another to preserve what is a very special DNA that does allow them special abilities. These abilities apparently, they allow them to be able to, they're very clever. They're very, very clever, but they're not really smart. And so that's the problem. Over time,
the giants are clever but not smart. Who's clever?
No, I'm talking about the current ruling families and their current.
Oh, yes.
100 ruling families. They're very, very clever, which is what's led them to be able to remain in power all of this time. But yeah, that's what we're dealing with. It's a multifaceted problem.
And you're saying clever but not enlightened. Like they're not smart in that they're not. They're all vying for control.
Right now they're squeezing to keep control, and it's slowly slipping out of their fingers. That's just, and that's the natural way of things. But they're going to fight as much as they can. But make no mistake, they trace their lineage. They know who their progenitors are, and they say, well, we were the lineages, the very first ones to come around. You know what I mean? And that's why they claim this right to rule. So, But I think what you're seeing with the red-haired giants, which is a fascinating tale, is the survival of one of these bloodlines that became kind of dominant around the globe, and they were the red-haired giants. And the most interesting tale about them comes from the Paiute Indians, and they refer to them as the Seetica. And the Seetica literally means the eaters of a particular watery fibrous plant, right? And that's literally what it means. These giants, they ate this watery fibrous plant, right? Well, in the Bible, sometimes the giants were referred to as the lords of the marsh. How weird, right? It's the same exact symbolism that you see there. And I tell you, an even more fascinating thing than that is there's a woman who I think is now passed away. Her name was Sarah Winnemucca, and she was a Paiute oral historian. And she came from a time, like her family's survival came all the way from a time with the conflict with those red-haired giants. And she had 2 male family members that were warriors during that war that took place, right? She's got what she calls a mourning dress, MOURN. And it is literally woven with the red hair of the scalp giants. How's that for crazy? Literally, the DNA is there on this dress. And of course, it's considered to be the holiest thing. They're not going to ever allow anybody to take a sample off of it. But yes, she has or had what's called a mourning dress. Maybe her daughter does now. I don't know.
You were just blowing my mind. Okay. We can go so many places because you're just like this. You are like a living library. So let's go ahead and talk about reptilians, since we had brought that up, or you had brought that up as evolving that direction. And because you were saying, I believe it was one of the shows I was listening to when I was researching you, that the Anunnaki were having issues with the reptilians as well when they came in. Is that correct?
Yeah. Apparently, the same group of remote viewers at Farsight have targeted the reptilian aliens a number of times. They've discovered some really disturbing things. Number one, they appear to have been present on the Earth during this other conflict that was taking place. They can't really tell what was happening with the reptilians, but they were present.
During the Anunnaki conflict with being cast
with
down.
The Mars. Right.
Okay. On Mars,
They can tell from recently. This is a very recent thing that they just conducted, this whole operation to try to figure out the origins of the reptilian aliens. And according to them, they originate from outside of this galaxy. That they came from another galaxy, and that they are a warlike species. That they describe them, and I'll never forget their words when they said this. They have fought many battles, and they have won many battles. They are extremely aggressive. And their apparent end goal is to control as much life consciousness as possible. We don't know exactly why. We can theorize that perhaps if you're a species and you can control so much of the universe life consciousness, perhaps that gives you some sort of upper tier, I don't know. Maybe it makes you the dominant species of the universe. Maybe it makes you like a godlike species. But they describe them as traveling from planet to planet to planet and infusing their DNA into the life forms in a way that allows them to control the actual consciousness of that life form.
Okay, let's back up on that one then. Because so my understanding is that, and again, like I'm just collecting information, I don't create a religion around any this or that, but that they came actually in from a different universe. They weren't even from this universe originally. And that because they're not operating out of light, but they're operating out of like pure ego, they can't produce certain things within their own evolutionary path because they're disconnected from the light. So it's like, it's vampiric. It's like, okay, well, we need the consciousness and that light source from others in order to survive. So it's more of a vampiric relationship to the life forms on the planet that they conquer and take over. What's your thought about that?
Oh yeah, that could very well be the case, and that's what's being described. The same group of remote viewers have described in graphic detail what they claim to be an operational reptilian base in the continental United States. And when you see them actually do their viewings, it's not something that you can write off easily. It's when 5 of them located in different places around the globe all draw the same exact landscape where this is supposed to be and describe it all with the exact same wording and the exact same events taking place inside, it becomes pretty horrific. And what they were describing is what apparently is above ground, a very benign looking set of buildings in an area that is very pristine, that they described as being national park like. They could see mountains in the distance. And interestingly enough, they saw on the ground, on the facility grounds, men in black. Inside and below the surface, which is where the fun really begins, they saw systematic torture of thousands of missing people. The systematic torture is put into place in order to produce a certain type of enzyme in the endocrine system of the human body, which they need for sustenance. So yes, very vampiric-like. But the substance can only be generated through a very specific type of torture and pain that they basically put you through. And it's completely systematic. They've got it down to a science to produce the end product. Imagine how horrific that is. They described people in cages with just hopeless looks on their faces, knowing that their end was about to happen. This is what we're up against, and why I'm so passionate about the subject and about tackling what I believe to be a real problem on our planet. And when you look at stuff like I just did on my YouTube channel, an entire intelligence brief on the reptilian agenda, and you look at stuff like the research of David Icke, for example. And David Icke will tell you, these are creatures that apparently have the ability to control through vibration, frequency, and sound, right? And because of that, you have, he and a lot of other people believe that there are elements of the reptilians who actively seek control of both entertainment images, sound in the entertainment industry through music, vibration, and frequency. You see in ancient biblical traditions that the idea that Lucifer is the perfect musician can affect you through sound, vibration, and frequency, and he is the dragon, the reptilian, the form, right? It's weird how all of that ends up forming together. Here is where I'll blow your mind.
Too late.
So just a few years ago, Howard Stern is doing an interview with one of my favorite rock stars, Billy Corgan, and I'm tuned in. And Billy begins to tell a story about how he's alone one night with a person whom he will not identify, but alludes to being involved in the music industry. And he claims on camera, and this is out there, and I've published it many times, that this person shifted right in front of him into something which he described as being non-human. He was not kidding. He also said, I can say no more about this, And in a subsequent Rolling Stone interview, he reiterated the truth of it. So not only did he say it once, he said it twice, and he meant it both times. So you're talking about, here's a guy involved heavily in the music industry with music executives. He's in the back of a limousine one night, and this person decides to show him the secret. And they just shifted right in front of him. That's what you're talking about.
Do you feel that this person, bringing this back down to the reptilian connection genetically, do you feel that this person's being was a reptilian, or that there was a human that was manifesting its reptilian genetic alignment? Or
well, it's impossible to tell, but according to his brain and his eyes, and he described the person as being nude. They were not wearing clothing. So this was a full body transformation.
Okay.
This wasn't just somebody who glamored using magic and caused him to see a slight reptilian view. This was somebody who shifted so fundamentally in front of him that it caused him to profoundly announce it during an interview on the Howard Stern show. That's something that's bothering somebody.
Well, it sounds like the glamour was removed. Like the
That's what
glamour
it
was.
is. Well, when you're a
the-
magician, you can cause somebody to see an animal face.
Mhm.
They call it shape shifting, but really all you're doing is projecting the image that you have a wolf head into their brain. You know, it's that kind of a thing. This person apparently literally biologically shifted into something else.
Okay.
I kind of have two questions. Does the the enzyme or whatever that they're harvesting, is that like the adrenochrome
It is
relation? Right.
It is.
And then, so I was going to bring up kind of the shifting, and you kind of talked about it. And I'm pretty sure I saw that when I watched, because I watched that episode. I was scrolling through your list, and I was like, oh,
cool.
I want to watch this one.
Cool.
Because I was like, that sounds so familiar. I just heard that. And then I was like, well, no shit, Jason, because you just watched it on his YouTube.
Right.
But like the whole, before I was going to mention like the kind of the elite, the musicians, the entertainers, and then you just so happen to bring up like how they can manipulate you with sound and all this. Is that another reason why you see these videos of like these? Well, there's one going around with Katy Perry right now, where her whole eye it's jacked. But then you see these newscasters, like you always see like these people on these like newscasters and stuff that either like freeze up or like they blink and they're, and I get it. People can do amazing things with technology and take it for a grain of salt, like when you see it. But some of it, you're just like, if that was so fast and like no one saw it, you know what I'm saying? Like there was one person that called it and then they brought it to everyone else's attention. I don't know. So those aren't really questions, I don't guess.
No, but
more of statements.
But no, I'm commiserate with the observation because I've seen those videos too, and I'm not sure what to make of them either. I've also seen video of a presidential bodyguard who, when the camera shifted to a certain angle and a certain frame rate, you could see the hologram go away and see the reptilian face. It was really quite disturbing. I do have that on one of my videos. I've got, I think, 3 videos dealing with the reptilians now on the YouTube channel, and that footage of that guard is actually on there. But since you watched that last one, and since we love ancient mysteries so much, it's in the Emerald Tablet of Thoth that I recently found that little paragraph, and man, it raises the hair on the back of your neck. It really does. And, and it basically describes how these serpent men, who you couldn't tell were serpents, slowly made their way into the councils of men, as they said, and basically sought to rule over them, and that they could only be seen with the use of sound. Their real faces could only be seen through the use of sound. That's crazy, considering all of the other peripheral information that we have regarding the phenomenon.
Okay, so I'm going to step in. Oh, there we go again with the feedback. So I'm the practical, like I have to have that left brain, right brain in there. I want to share that I had an experience with my stepson where he was just going down, down, down in his mental states, and he was always listening to certain music. And so I did an experiment with him and pulled CD from his music, pulled Mozart on the other, put them in cases where we didn't know which one, did a double blind on it, and did muscle testing with him. And he was so weak when he held his music that he could not raise his arm against mine.
Wow.
Against my finger. And that was just holding the CD. And then when he flipped onto the Mozart, I could not push his hand down.
Wow.
So,
Amazing.
what we put in matters.
It does. It does. And, we have to realize this is a parasitic species, and they're just scientifically advanced enough to be able to use those types of things to control us. And I think that that's exactly what's happening. I really do. So whether or not, and this is something I'm trying to figure out myself, and I don't know. I don't know if the current long-running alien abduction phenomenon dealing with the gray aliens is in fact operated by the reptilians. I don't know if they represent a completely different species or if one is a subset of the other. For instance, the grays, we truly believe are just a worker drone species. They are biologically grown and biologically programmed through their DNA to conduct a very specific set of instructions. And that's all they do. And they're doing it for some other more advanced life form. What's behind that, we don't know, because the furthest that we can see up the food chain is to the mantis beings, who are just above the grays, who appear to be the master geneticist. Beyond that, we can't see further. The alien abductee phenomenon, even after 40 years, that's as for the furthest that we can view up the food chain. And the one thing that the aliens interacting with the abductees never answer is the why. They've answered every other question. They never answered the why. And the why is something that is long sought after, of course, by all of us paranormal investigators.
Why abductions?
Why are they going to this kind of degree of integrating really their DNA into the human life stream? And that's it. It's not like they're wanting to alter the planet or alter the species or alter any event outcome. It's not like that. It's the weirdest thing ever. It's like they just want to hide within our species. Isn't that weird? And I've often asked people, because I believe that this is a prison planet, why would you want to sneak into a prison and look sufficiently enough like the other inmates not to be noticed? Because if you can answer that question, it's the answer, the ultimate answer to the alien abductee phenomenon as we know it.
I'm gonna hop in here just with some other experiences and perceptions, because we have people who come on our show that have very benevolent, loving grays and very benevolent, loving mantis. So I think, just to kind of put that footnote here that it's not one size fits all. And some people have encounters with, actually benevolent reptilians who I who I think that, again, they might be distant cousins to each other, but it's not the same species.
Oh yeah, and that relationship, there's a lot of abductees who describe their experiences as being positive, but the one thing that never changes is the end goal. And the end goal is a hybridization program. And whether or not they have a good relationship or not, that program is still taking place, and it's taking place clandestinely. It's not like they've openly announced themselves and said, hey guys, we need some of your genetics in order to survive. Is it okay if we trade you a little technology, you know? Come by, we'll swab your mouth, give us a little bit of that DNA. No, no, no. They come in the middle of the night. A lot of people, they jerk out of bed who don't want to be a part of that phenomenon at all, and then suffer horrific experiences afterwards. So yeah, there's a positive side. Some people have that, but there's a huge side that just is not.
Yeah, I think it's depending on the person and their experience, because there are some people who have, they know, you know, they're part of a genetic program and they know it. They're like, I'm part of this, and they're
Right.
okay with it, because on the other side, they know that they're part of that race. Like they know that they're part of this other race, and they come into a human form, and this
Sure.
is a continuation of their project. And what I understand as well is that there's a vying of timelines. Like it's like there are, you know, Pleiadians, there are Arcturians, there's the reptilians, there's all this host of beings, and they're all vying for certain outcomes that they see as positive, they see as good. And so it's subjective to that race, except for, of course, like reptilian, where it's like, you know, it's just common, it's domination and conquering. And so that's pretty blatant.
Well, even to them, it's subjective.
Well,
something
right.
something created them as well to perform whatever function they're performing. Well, whoever I just call them the programmers at this stage, because I'm starting to tune into the idea that we might just be in a hologram, and that there's programmers messing with us. You know what I mean?
It's so complex. I mean, that's the thing, is like on this show, we talk about all that stuff. And it's like, if you open all the doors at once, your head's going to pop off and explode, because
Right.
there's so many different factions, experiences, perceptions. And I always have to come back to like the oneness that's beneath it all, that like this is still the breath of God, the breath of, you know, divine source energy coming through, having this experience of division, having this experience of me against myself in the evolution of understanding what oneness and life and consciousness actually is.
Right.
That's how I frame it.
Do you want my my 10th man theory for the alien abduction phenomenon?
Go for it.
Good, because you're going to get it anyway.
No, hold back. Don't say anything more, Jack.
So for people that aren't familiar with the 10th man theory, so it originates from the movie World War Z. And it's a fascinating idea that the author came up with, right? So all of the nations are preparing for this Armageddon of zombies and whatnot. You know the story. And Israel builds a giant wall all the way around. None of the other countries do, but they end up being safe. And so Brad Pitt's character, he travels over there to talk to the guy who came up with that idea, to figure out how he did it, right? And he's talking to him and he says, well, I was the 10th man. He's like, what do you mean? He goes, well, with a problem like this, we form a council of 10 men. 10 counselors. There could be women involved. I don't know. 10 men and women. 9 of them come up with a logical solution to the problem all together, and they act on that problem. The 10th man assumes that they are all wrong and acts accordingly. And he is given full authority to act accordingly and to do what he wants to do. Well, he ends up building a wall and he ends up saving the country, right? My 10th man theory, which goes contrary to what everybody else is thinking at this time, and it's based on my prison planet idea, the prison planet idea, is that the Greys may be here for a jailbreak
Ooh,
About that.
say more about it. I like it. It gave me energy.
Well, let's say that you want to sneak into a prison and you want to look like an inmate and you don't want to be detected. There's only one reason you do that, and that's to break somebody else out. And so my 10th man theory is that the reason why they feel so, well, I guess on the right side of things to do what they're doing, even clandestinely, is that they know it'll lead to the freedom of our species overall and in time where the reptilians are concerned.
That makes my heart open. I like that.
That's just my theory.
I like it.
But let's face it, they bring us back every time.
Well, as far as, yeah,
The reptilians don't bring people back.
there you go. There you go.
The Greys
Yeah.
bring you back.
Yeah. And I feel like, well, anyway, I want to get to this question just to make sure we get it in. Thank you, Lynda, for sharing this. So Hani Veria, I probably said that wrong. I apologize. She asks, do you think the Deva Ashura myth related to the Anunnaki? And don't know about the Deva Ashura myth. Do you?
I do not. No.
Okay. So we can't speak to that, unfortunately.
We have one other question that came
Great.
on early that hasn't been asked, and that has to do with the Baltic Sea anomaly
Mhm.
that was recently brought forward. And if you have any insight opinions on that.
Well, I can tell you, everything I know about the Baltic Sea anomaly is what's been published. I have gone through all of that material, and there is some strange things about it. For instance, every time they get near it with electrical equipment, that equipment cuts out. So it has to be emitting an electromagnetic field of some kind, which means it couldn't just be a natural effect. It's possible that it was an alien structure of some kind that's just encrusted. It's so old that it just sort of petrified around it.
For those of us that don't know what the anomaly is this an object?
It is. It's a huge object that sort of looks like the Millennium Falcon that was discovered by some treasure.
Oh, I know. Now I know what you're talking about.
Speak to it, though. Speak to it and pack it for those of us who still don't.
Yeah, there were some guys that run a treasure salvage company, and they looked mainly for wine that sunk to the bottom of the ocean. You imagine wine that's hundreds of years old. The profit in that is it's more than gold, more than silver. So they specialize in wine recovery, believe it or not. But they came across this structure that did not appear to be natural, and it's big and it looks like a spaceship, but at the same time it kind of looks like it's made out of rock, and it's utterly bizarre. It really is. But if you Google Baltic Sea anomaly, you'll come up with a ton of stuff.
So it's a huge ship-looking like structure.
On the bottom.
Millennial Falcon, Star Wars.
Yeah.
It looks just like the ship.
It looks just like it.
I do have a question. And this is in regards to if we have these 200 bloodlines from the Anunnaki, people in power, but then we also have these reptilian forces that are in these powers of position. How do those interconnect? Are they related? Are they one versus the other? Are we commingling? Are we partners? What's that all about?
Yeah, I think that I honestly think that they're sort of at competition with one another. I really do. When the remote viewers view the reptilians, they kind of view them as being an exterior force to everything else that's on the planet right now. Even the ruling families and the elite and all of that. These things are sort of embedded down in underground bases and in the ocean and stuff like that. They don't appear to be turning themselves into humans and trying to walk around among us.
Is there a connection to the raptor type beings that are commonly known to being in inner Earth?
Yeah, same thing. That's the Silurian hypothesis, which
Okay.
I was talking about earlier. Yeah, that they're still alive from inner Earth and that they actually originate from there is the other predominant theory, but it doesn't match with the remote viewers. borderline targeting the species.
Well, it could be two different.
Could be.
Not to say that you couldn't have one that was
Right.
home here and then one from outside.
It's possible. Carl Sagan said that there are more possible DNA combinations in the universe than there are combinations of atoms.
Whoa.
Think about that. So the idea that there couldn't be reptilian life forms that are, advanced is wrong. Of course.
And then if I can ask one more question, and this is kind of about the investigation side of it. How do you get in touch or in contact with this material that is not open to the public? Like, I know you have to know somebody knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. But it's like once the people in power realize, oh, this document's, it has a lot of information, we lock it away, right? The same example with the Smithsonian coming and taking all types of stuff.
Right.
How does one, as like an investigator, how do you start making those connections or finding the pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah, well, I'm known as a forensic investigator, and that's sort of like a forensic accountant with the paranormal. So where I do an investigation and I sit down and I began a video intelligence brief, I begin by collecting through OSINT or open source intelligence gathering techniques, every single piece of published material that there is about it. I read through all of it. And while I'm reading it, I'm dissecting it, trying to find the source of different information. And a lot of times what you'll see is that you can take that information and it just begins to spiderweb out. You'll be able to just trace a source, and all of a sudden that source leads to another one, to another one, to another one, and you'll begin to see how it's all connected. But the key is in simply absorbing all that's available out there, because until you do that, you're not going to be able to see the other connections and how they connect with it.
What tools of discernment do you use?
As far as discernment?
In the sense of this feels right, this doesn't.
You know what? I ascribe very much to the Gnostic philosophy that enlightenment, real true enlightenment, comes through knowledge itself. And so for me, I think that there's an innate ability in humans when their heart is in the right place to be able to discern what is true information and what isn't. But there's also, it really comes down to just doing the work. There's a lot of work in actually verifying different things. And if you can find 2 or 3 disparate sources that all seem to point in the same direction, then that's always a really good indication that you've got something with real substance.
Have you had, or was there anyone experience that you had that put you on this path, or a story, or was there a personal experience? Like what opened the door for you?
It was kind of a perfect storm for me. And after I battled it for 20 years, I decided that the universe had one thing it wanted me to do, and that was be a paranormal investigator. And I fought it because, let's face it, it's not something that anybody wants to do, because there's no money, there's no fame, there's no anything, it's the pursuit of truth. That's simply what it is. And for me, I happened to grow up in an old antebellum mansion down in southeastern Oklahoma that was built prior to the Civil War, that was so haunted that it literally scarred me as a child. Like full on black figures walking around, that kind of thing. And also as a child in the same town, the small little town, I had an alien abduction experience. And this was in an area where historically there were more Bigfoot sightings than almost anywhere else in North America. And as a child, I was just endlessly fascinated with Bigfoot. In fact, my very first television memory of ever watching television. It was of watching a Bigfoot documentary that I begged my parents to watch, that I could watch. It was like 6 years old. But yeah, so for me, I kind of grew up in this whirlwind of paranormal stuff that was going on, and it was something that I couldn't ever just put away. If I watched TV, I was naturally drawn to those subjects. And over time, it literally became all I watched, all I read, all I talked to others about, and that turned into what is now a 30-year pursuit.
So I would like to hear about your alien abduction. I want to talk more about the reptilians because you said something contradictory, and I want to talk about that. But what was your, and thank you so much, Jason, for asking that, because normally that's how I start a show. Is I'm like, what got you into that? And for some reason, I was so excited about the Anunnaki that I skipped over that. So thank you, Jason. What was your ET abduction, for goodness sakes?
For me, it was like you described, a positive experience. I remember being very excited afterwards, and excited the next day when I told my friends about it. They all thought I was crazy. And I said, and I was excited they were coming back. Like, I remember being excited that they were going to come back. But my memory is of looking out my bedroom window in the early misty morning and seeing two of the Greys walking off into the mist to their craft. And I knew that I had been interacting with them. I was watching them leave. So, yeah.
Wow.
But it was exciting for me as a child. It didn't scare me for whatever reason.
Yeah, it was family.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah.
Like your friends, your family had come back to pick you up.
Right.
It's like you grew up in a paranormal vortex, and now you have become the paranormal vortex. Like,
right. That's funny.
So I wanted to say, because you had said that, I just want to pick this apart a little bit with with our genetic lineage, our genetic composition. So we've got reptilian in there, we've got Anunnaki in there, and then I think we also have Pleiadian in there. That's my understanding, is that like there's Pleiadian within us as well. So there's this and I think there's probably more, because I feel like we are sort of a genetic experiment for many different what are called farmer races, who are just like, we've got projects and you're our project, we have outcomes that we're looking for. And so I'm wondering how, because when people talk about like the royal family is a great one, or any of the rulers, the presidential figures, so often the narrative is that they are reptilian and that they are controlled by the reptilians, or they are actually reptilian beings that are shapeshifters. And so, and you had said that, the reptilians were underground bases, not walking up on the surface. However, then we have Billy Corgan saying, I've got one in my car. Mm-hmm. So like.
Now, what I mean by that is that they're not genetically turning themselves into humans. I think that they use a technology that creates the hologram. And that's the difference. Is the Anunnaki were literally turning us to make us look like them. The reptilians don't care about that so much. They have a technology that just allows them to look like us. And that's why in the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, it says, only through sound could their faces be seen. It was because they use this technology, and it's the technology of sound, frequency, and vibration, which is central to what their entire science is, which I think is also central to what the Anunnaki, I think, Tesla said the secret of the universe was sound, frequency, and vibration, right? And I think that these were groups of aliens who knew that and know how to manipulate it in such a way that when you're dealing with a species that doesn't know how, it gives you such an advantage over them.
So even though they have a much more limited, because it's for them, it's manipulation as opposed to expression. So
as opposed to, right. They're using a technology to cover their faces, not altering their biology to look like us.
Yeah, that feels really right.
Here's another really interesting point I'd like to point out to your audience, is a CIA operation And the CIA operation is called Project Mockingbird. Now, this is out there. Everybody can research it and look at it. It was discovered by a famous editor at the Washington Post, who then wrote a bunch of articles about it. So we know that it's well documented from real journalists, who then she found out that the CIA was actively embedding agents into both the media companies, news media, as well as the entertainment industry, for ends of what they believe to be what's called predictive programming, right? They can embed you, show you images, show the public images over time, and then they can predict what the response will be if that image is real. You know what I mean? Slowly they can warm you up to an idea this way, so it's not such a shock to society. Well, there's a little known television series produced in the early 1980s, and it was called V, right? And V depicts perfectly in fictional form exactly what all of our research shows. A reptilian species who uses, in their case, a type of plastic, like stage makeup, basically, to look human. But in our case, we know they're using a holographic technology of some kind. And in this case, they're actively stealing the Earth's water for their own needs. And in our case, they're actively stealing genetics, water, whatever they want from the planet. And I ask you, what are the odds that you have a CIA-run project in the entertainment industry that ends up depicting in fictional form for only 2 years exactly what we end up discovering years later, beginning with the research of David Icke? Quite bizarre.
Yeah, it's like I mean, and I don't know, I mean, God, that just brings up a whole other host of questions. And I think that, like, as a collective species, we're also trying to tell ourselves something. Like, we're like, remember, remember, remember. And it's, coming up in different ways and different, through different artistic creations as well.
Yeah, what really brought that back up into my brain was that I was watching a UFO case, and it's the case of a UFO over a lake in Brazil. And it hovered over the lake for an entire night, disappeared the next morning. The next day, the next morning, that lake was 3 inches lower than the day before. The scientist for the Science Channel calculated how much water that was. It was 2 billion gallons of water.
2 billion?
It sucked up 2 billion gallons of water in one night and left with it. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I was a little boy watching this on V. That's exactly what they did. They came over bodies of water and they sucked up all the water and they flew off with it, And I'm like, oh my God, how is that possible that somebody in 1980 came up with the same plot that we're now seeing unfold on this planet? It just, it amazes me.
Wow. Jason or Lynda, go ahead. I know I want to bring this one piece back, but go ahead.
Well, also, I mean, there's really well documented images of ships pulling plasma from the sun.
Yes.
You can see those videos.
Yes.
And they were NASA videos.
They were Soho cameras. They absolutely were. I've seen those videos. Absolutely. Yeah.
Which would make a lot of sense if that is pure energy. And
it is.
Plasma,
Makes
what a great
sense.
source of energy for a ship.
You see how fast that thing shot off from the sun once it got done fueling up. Oh my God, right. I'll never forget how fast. It's just crazy.
And they have multiple videos like that.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Jason, did you have a thought?
I was just gonna say, now I just have so many things running through my head.
Right?
Like one was because we talked about when you were getting coffee, Jack, we kind of talked about certain TV shows that, Stargate, and that there's that movie, The Jupiter Rising, or there's like they're dropping little hints, and then, Lynda talking about these ships sucking up plasma from the sun, or something that I watched that talked about certain levels of civilization, and one of them is indicated by us being able to build a diosphere. Is that what it's called? Around a star, to where that's what gives us power.
The Dyson sphere,
the Dyson sphere, which makes me think of a vacuum cleaner. Isn't that what the vacuum cleaner on the ball is called?
Actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that kind of is the final point I would like to talk about, and it was something me and Kat had discussed previously. So this is something that's unanswered and unknown in paranormal / occult / ancient mystery research. So we got 3 different traditions on this planet. Each one comes from a different star system. Number 1, the Western Dogon tribe. The Dogon tribe in Western Africa. They trace their lineage all the way back to ancient Egypt. They migrated all the way down. They had knowledge of the Sirius star system in 1935 that we couldn't. That's the very first time anthropologists came across them. They started talking to them about Sirius. The natives did. They had knowledge that we couldn't prove was even true until the 1990s, right? They have a tradition that they interacted with an alien species that they call the Nomos, and that it was the Nomos who taught them everything they know about Sirius and who came from the Sirius star system. We then, on the ground here, have this oral history of this contact from Sirius. Next, you have some ancient civilizations who clearly are describing contact with aliens from the Orion star system. They too look humanoid, but they're clearly from Orion. And I'm talking about the whole like Egyptian type culture, and it goes back way further than that, etc. And then you have a Native American tradition, and they have contact from the Pleiades. But they're humanoid too, right? So I'm calling this the Easter Island theory. Is it possible that Enrico Fermi, the famous scientist, was correct when he said that the absence of aliens on our doorstep is in itself significant? And that was in response to the Drake equation, which was designed in order to tell us how many civilizations there should be right now living that we could have contact with. And Enrico Fermi comes along and he's like, look, according to this equation, which everybody's using, at least one of these civilizations should have lived long enough and become advanced enough to have colonized the entire galaxy, right? But he wasn't paying attention to the UFO phenomenon. They were just writing that off. He didn't realize that they were on our doorstep because they all thought, oh, well, if they come, they're just going to land on the White House lawn. You know, these brilliant scientists, they had these preconceived notions of what alien contact would be like, that they certainly wouldn't hide themselves from our presence. Oh, couldn't be.
Well, there is actually a very well documented case of UFOs over the White House.
Oh yeah, 1950s.
With shots fired in protection.
They flew over quite a few nights over in the 1950s, right?
Yeah.
But my question is, and my theory is this: because biologists will tell you that humanoid life should only develop on one planet. All of the various combinations, the millions of things that have to take place in order for humans to look like humans and to be humans and to have thumbs that can manipulate matter, etc., is so astronomical that to have that duplicate on another planet is almost impossible. Yet we have some new biologists who are out there writing papers telling us it's quite possible, from what we know now about biology, that for all intelligent life to have to eventually develop into a bipedal form of life with hands that can manipulate matter in order to create technology as we would understand it. So my question is this: was Enrico right? Is it possible that we, the Sirians, the Orions, the Pleiadians, are all part of an ancient Type 3 civilization that has already colonized the entire galaxy and is so old, so advanced, that it seeds entire planetary systems with this humanoid life, DNA, only to come back millions of years later and farm that back into its society?
When they
And
talk about the
that's-
ancient builder race, are they referring to the Anunnaki, or is that something different?
No, ancient boulder race, nobody knows who they were.
Okay.
No, nobody knows. Total unknown. But they
That's
were
for the
builders.
the Anunnaki would have come from the ancient builder race. That would have
Possible.
been one of their lineages. That's like the
It's
hypothesis.
quite possible, yeah.
Yeah.
But is it possible that that's the scenario? And that's the reason why these varying groups from the other islands are coming to this island, because they're looking for the pieces of the same puzzle, and we're part of that same seeding.
And they've all got their own agenda within
Right.
that.
And yeah, they're all looking for the same answers, and they all advanced at different rates, of course, but they see us as part of the same seeding. You see what I mean?
So I'm going to try and explain what keeps coming into my head through this whole conversation and came in once before. Was I hear the word ark, the ark, like we are the ark, and the repository of genes.
I've heard that many times. And, the other scenario I've often entertained is that the Greys and whoever their progenitor race are endlessly fascinated with the DNA skills that the Anunnaki must have possessed. And I think they're studying exactly their work, because we are a culmination of their work, really.
Well, I've heard that all of our quote unquote junk DNA, because I've heard it's like double digits, like 20 something, like 22, 26,
Right.
like different species that make up us. And
You're right.
our junk DNA are the different aspects of all of those that work that, and we just haven't aligned to it yet, but it's slowly but surely that those lights are blinking. And that's why like all of this type of stuff is more in our awareness and why we're focusing on it more, because it's like the Christmas tree like that you got out for light, you put it on the tree, like it's almost about to start to work, like the light's blinking for a moment,
Right.
and you're about to plug in and the whole thing's about to light up.
Right.
What's been crazy is like every time I think of a question to ask, you answer it.
Oh, wow.
Before I'm asking it. Like I've marked off so much stuff off my little sheet of paper. I'm like, he just answered that. He answered this.
Well, next time we can get into my cryptozoology work, because it's an extension of all of this.
And I love Bigfoot.
Right. So I discovered in the course of my research, and I became blood brothers with a guy named J.C. Johnson, who most describe as being the greatest cryptozoologist that ever lived. And he taught me a ton of stuff. And I came to the understanding that the animals that we were hunting, these bipedal animals, were the genetic creations of the Anunnaki from long ago. They're still out there, and they're still alive, and they're still surviving. And that's what people are seeing. And we'll have to get into all of that and how we collected DNA and how that DNA proved to us that that was exactly the case. So,
And cryptozoology is more than just Bigfoot. It's like all
yeah.
mythical,
yeah.
like Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra,
Sure,
Mothman.
any animal that people see that science doesn't acknowledge as existing, and that can be stuff as mundane as like the dire wolf, when we've had plenty of like prehistoric animal sightings where we have the remains, we know the species existed, but we're getting modern day sightings of the species. That's also cryptozoology. So I'm long on the hunt of the dire wolf. I know for a fact it still exists, and that's a prehistoric wolf that was about 10 times the size of our current timber wolves. So you can imagine how big of a beast that is. The thylacine, for example, the Tasmanian tiger, that's a cryptozoological animal, and those species are described as Lazarus species. The Bigfoot animals, the dogmen, which I would love to get into with you guys, those are what I call the woo world animals. And I believe there's a direct ET connection to those animals.
When you say Lazarus animals, are you meaning like animals that have gone, because there are reports of animals that we knew to be extinct.
Exactly.
That they are now alive, like they have risen from the Lazarus pit, right?
Yeah. In cryptozoology, those are known as the Lazarus species. Yeah.
Because I've heard it described as current species that were alive somehow adjusted or manipulated their DNA to
Right. It's almost like the animal that came from their line has a recessed gene, and it comes active again, and all of a sudden that species comes born back into our biology.
Wow. All right, we are over time, and I don't know if people have obligations and whatnot, but that's a perfect segue, because that is what we're going to do next week. Is we're going to talk about we're going to bring Mr. Jack back. Jack is back, and we're going to talk to him about not just Sasquatch, because Sasquatch for us isn't, we don't see on our place on our show, we see him as family, not a cryptid, like our elder brother, you know.
Yes.
And so we're going to talk about Sasquatch, but then also all these other things that you've just whet my appetite for. And there are questions I didn't quite get to because it's just so rich. So I might start off next week just to wrap up those questions. And then like the final threads to those things about the Anunnaki and the reptilian situation, in terms of people vying for power and where who on what side are they coming from, and all that. But we'll go ahead and start wrapping up, unless there are any final questions from the audience or from Jason or Lynda.
If there are, we will hold them till next week.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to toss the mic to Lynda to start our gratitudes.
I loved that within our chats, people actually even put in books and resources that they found fascinating. So I'd love that to continue in our Facebook group. If you haven't joined our Facebook group, go to Third Eye Salon, and we will have you join our Facebook group to learn and continue the discussion. In the meantime, especially since we're having Jack back next week, check out the links below so that you can both check out his books, but his videos, so that you can come up with even more questions for next week. And again, thank you all for supporting our program. We love you. Share it with people you know, help us grow our community. And with that, Jack, thank you for not only coming in this week, but next week. How fun is that gonna be, everybody? So, Jason, thank you for asking such great questions and bringing in your observations. I always love to hear from you as well. And Kat, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to, you know what? I'll flip us into Brady Bunch view. I've gotten lazy about that. I need to start doing that on a regular basis. All right. So we're all on the screen here. And yeah, I think Lynda hit it all. Thank you everyone so much for being part of our community. It's just amazing, and it continues to grow and it continues to expand, and we're all wanting to connect from our hearts and bring the knowledge, the wisdom, and the fire of love deeper and further and wider into everything and everywhere we touch. So thank you all for being part of that. And with that, be kind to yourself, be kinder to others. We love you. Good day. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.